As is our custom to do, okay, they've got yours. As is our custom to do when we finish a book of the Bible, first off, thank you for joining us by way of YouTube. We are going to be overviewing the book of Hebrews, which we wrapped up 2 weeks ago. Then I was sick, but I had planned on doing another time. It just did not work out. But Hebrews is a phenomenal book. And it was Herschel that said we should do it. It's got 13 chapters, and we didn't make it in 13 weeks, did we? We started December the 4th of 22, and we are finishing it today, May 28th of 23. So we did the best that we could. I would ask, what's some of your favorite verses or teachings from the book of Hebrews? What do you like? What did you like the best about what we covered? Yeah, abolishing the law. Mm-hmm.
We studied that, most of us, before we understood about an internet, the cloud, but it's the same kind of concept.
Right.
Christians have so many people that we can draw from.
Yeah.
And we had some people we wouldn't have normally considered, like Rahab or Samson.
Mm-hmm. And
that's very encouraging to me. It includes imperfect people.
Yeah, it does. With the imperfect, we said a couple weeks ago, sinners is all God has to work with. God has no other perfect people separate apart from Jesus to work with and accomplish his mission. And I think it's 1 Kings 15 and verse 5, speaking of David, it is said that he turned neither to the right hand nor to the left in anything that the Lord commanded him, save in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. But we know that David numbered the people. That was a transgression. We know that David ate the showbread. That was a transgression. We know that David committed other sins, but in the final analysis, the only thing that God ever held against him in his life was when Nathan the prophet had to come to him when he was living in sin. That encourages me. We do not have to be perfect. And I think we have the perfect. That is Jesus Christ. That is a great encouragement. Author, we don't know. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Hospitable, yeah. The hospitality. We need those reminders, don't we? And I think it's wonderful that we can just come together and study the text and see what God has for us. But when we consider Hebrews, the author is unknown. There's a lot of speculation, but the author is not named. And so we do well just to leave it there. There's several possibilities. Written between 64 and 68. Why do we know that it was written prior to AD 70? We know it was written prior to AD 70 because the Hebrews writer speaks as if the temple and the operations of the temple are still ongoing. So if it was written after AD 70, that he wouldn't have spoken as the temple in present tense with the offerings still happening. And so Titus had not yet surrounded Jerusalem and the temple was not yet destroyed. So sometime prior to AD 70, the book of Hebrews was written. Just some neat facts. It's the 58th book in the Bible, 19th of the New Testament, 14th of the 21 epistles. 8 books follow it before the conclusion of inspiration. It contains 13 chapters, 303 verses, 6,897 words. And the key word throughout the entire book is better. What is better about Christianity? There's several
There's
things.
so many things that would be hard to mention.
Yeah, there's so many things. Well, you could say everything. Everything about Christianity is better than that old system, that old economy of law that the Jews had come up under. The key verses are chapter 1, 1 through 4, chapter 8 and verse 6, chapter 12 and verse 2. The key phrase is by faith. And we've made a big deal about faith in the book of Hebrews. And we should make a big deal about faith, and it's more than just mental recognition and some type of academic knowledge. It is an action. It is a response to the command of God. Faith is our part. And so God gives a command, He gives an instruction, He gives a plan, and by faith we submit to that plan. The key chapter is chapter 11, which is normally entitled Faith's Hall of Fame, the Faith Roll Call. Any one of those will do. Chapter 11 is known as Faith's Hall of Fame. That's where we get everybody who is anybody. And it gets, it even mentions people that not by name, just by actions, things that they did. Yeah.
But you know, he's just glaringly missing having built the temple. Glaringly missing the people.
Yeah.
And I can't find another explanation since everybody's there.
Right. Yeah. And that's a great observation. But Solomon did do things by faith at different points of his life, and so. I would contend, as I think you would, that Solomon is in glory at this point. As an old man, he realized everything that he ever tried was vanity, and without God, that it's nothing. The subject of the book of Hebrews is the superiority of Christ over Moses. He's better than Moses. Over the prophets, Christ is a superior, better prophet. Over the angels, over the new covenant, and over the old covenant. We could also notice that the superiority of the blood of Christ, which is in there with the covenant. This is the blood of the covenant, right? So, but there's so many things, like you said, like Herschel said, everything about Christianity is better. The message, the thrust, if there was one main point in every good dissertation, every good letter, every good sermon, there's one main point that's being driven home. And the one main point that this author is telling these Jewish, these Hebrew Christians is don't give up. Do not give up. If we were to give the book of Revelation one main point, what would that one main point be? Christ is victorious. And if Christ is victorious, what does that make us? Victorious. We are in Him where salvation is, and this is the victory that overcomes the world, even our faith. When we are faithful in Christ, we have victory. And so the Hebrews writer is pushing them, saying, don't go back. Don't cheapen Christianity. Don't make it less than what it is supposed to be. And so that's something that the main message. Now, observations about here. The book is classed with Romans and Revelation as one of the three most profound books of the New Testament. Romans is arguably, but with good argument, one of the highest theological books in the Bible. Paul really hammers out some theology in Romans, and it's almost like he's in a car and he goes from one one thing to the next, and you really gotta follow it. Hebrews is right there with its importance. They're all important, but from a human standpoint, we look at these and we say, yeah, Romans is phenomenal. Revelation, you get a good time stamp, grip on it. Chapter 17 and verse 11 is extremely important for understanding the book. Things that must shortly come to pass is understanding things that are at hand. Hebrews is extremely important and profound. In chapter 9, verses 6 through 8, that's where the author speaks of the temple as in present tense is still standing. And that gives us the idea, as we were speaking of in opening, that the book was written prior to the destruction. The Hebrew Christians were suffering tremendous persecution and viewed Christ as the reason for the loss of everything. When the Jews converted to Christianity, they lost their families, they lost their houses, they lost their ability to even go to the market and buy bread. They truly gave up everything. And so it was immature human reaction to then project when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, whose fault was it? God's, right. It's humans, it's just what we do for some reason is place the blame. And these Jewish Christians were placing the blame on Christ for why they were losing everything. These Hebrew Christians had become discouraged and thus needed a word of encouragement. In chapter 13 and verse 22, he says, suffer this word of exhortation. That he had written them a word of exhortation in few words. 2 weeks ago, we remarked about how long it's taken us to go through these few words. This letter was not originally broken down in chapters and verses. The Bible wasn't written like that. Hebrews is one continuous letter, and the writer said that it is few words. If my sermons seem long, let's just stand up and read the 13 chapters of Hebrews and see how long that takes us to get through. And maybe that'll be well on my way to more job security. But the writer wanted the Christians to hold fast. That's what we were talking about this morning, clinging to the old rugged cross, being steadfast, unmovable, and abounding, 1 Corinthians 15:58. There are nearly 100 references to the Old Testament from all over the Septuagint in this letter. Every chapter quotes from the Old Testament. Old Testament history is continually mentioned, as well as Old Testament heroes of faith. So the lessons that we learn is that Jesus is prophet, priest, and king. Who else attained to those three offices simultaneously? No one. He's the only one. There were priests that were prophets. There were kings that were prophets. But no one was a prophet, a priest, and a king. Jesus is the only one. The second law of thermodynamics is found in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 10 through 12. For it became him, and thou, Lord, in the beginning hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the works of thine hands. They shall perish, but thou remainest, the self-existence of God. And they all shall wax old as doth a garment. And as a vesture shalt thou fold them up, and they shall be changed, but thou art the same, and thy years shall... What is the first law of thermodynamics? The second law. It says that all the energy that this world contains, that this universe contains, is all the energy that there is, and it's running downhill. That at some point in time, this universe contains its maximum amount of energy. And science recognizes the fact that it's running downhill. We're perpetually losing energy, okay? All that there ever was, is all we have right now. And that came into effect at a certain time, at a distinct point in time. Who made that come into effect? God did. And all that power that has sustained this world for some 6,000 years did not deplete him of his energy, not one bit. Not one bit. When God created all of this, all the energy, it didn't take from him one iota. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that neat to think about? In the beginning, he laid the foundation of the earth. The heavens are the works of his hands. They shall perish. What does that tell us? It's winding down. We're winding down like a clock needs to be turned up, but there's no more turning. All there is all there is. That is science. There's a lot of science so-called, where they promote all kinds of illogical things like the theory of evolution or theistic evolution. These things that don't make any sense and can easily be debunked with logic and fact. But the Bible, when it speaks scientifically, it speaks true. When the Bible speaks of it's not a science book, but when it speaks of science, it speaks accurately. Yeah. That's cute, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And in the middle of the summer, the cabin temperature jumps up like 7 degrees immediately. And yeah, I would rather my car to run. Maybe that's selfish of me. But yeah, love the planet. What God created here is absolutely amazing. And when we look out into the vast expanse of our universe, it's absolutely awe-inspiring and breathtaking. But someday it's going to perish. And it says, and thou shalt fold them up. And so I take that, I believe that.
Probably not long that I moved back to Georgia, big users throughout Hallelujah. And I heard from my own ears say that with the best rains, we're going to take at least 8 years to get Rainier back up to the normal level. And then God sent that flood. One night.
Yeah. I saw a picture on Facebook yesterday or the day before, and it was Plymouth Rock. And I think on the rock it's chiseled like 1625. And it shows that it's at sea level, right? Plymouth Rock is at sea level. And it says it's the picture, and it says Plymouth Rock at sea level is 1625. And then below it's Plymouth Rock at sea level in like 1912. And then a third picture is Plymouth Rock at sea level in 2023. You've got hundreds of years of stability there. And I just trust that as long as the Lord desires for this earth to remain, as long as Jesus helps it consist, holds it together, it'll be held together irregardless of what we do. We learn, number 3, there is a danger in falling away. Listened to a debate yesterday in which a Reformed Calvinist, he's a Reformed Baptist, holds to the old 16, whatever it is, Confession of Faith, England's Confession of Faith. And he was contending that you cannot fall away and lose your salvation. And those that seem to be saved and do fall away, well, they were never saved to begin with. And so it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me as we see over and over and over in the New Testament warnings that are given to apostasy and unfaithfulness and falling away. Now, would you warn your child today, now don't go fall out of an airplane? Is there any real danger if your child is not boarding an airplane for her to fall out or him to fall out of an airplane? No, we don't warn our children about things that are not going to happen, that are impossibilities. If Remy never gets on an airplane today, it's going to be impossible for him to fall out of one. And so I'm not going to warn him today about falling out of an airplane. But God repeatedly gives warnings throughout. Yeah. There was a danger there. And they were warned all throughout. We're soon to get into the book of Judges. And there was a warning. If you do my will, and if you keep my law, and if you keep my Sabbaths, then you will have this land, and you'll have rest, and you'll have bounty. But if you don't, then you're going to suffer. I mean, that's the gist of it.
As we get through the book in chapter 12, at the end, very end, there's the warning about God's nature.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have to be
Yeah.
worried about falling away, because for our God is a consuming fire.
Yeah, I mean, Hebrews 10:31, what a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. If there was nothing to be feared, the name of the Lord is greatly to be feared among the saints. If there's nothing to fear, then why all these warnings? Well, there is something to fear, and that's eternal damnation. And that is even for those who have once been in the fold of God. They can fall away. Jesus died for all. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 9, we learned that. There's also false doctrines that say Jesus died only for the elect. And every time you see the word all or every man, well, that means every elect man or all elect people. And so there's all kinds of false doctrines, and the Bible refutes and anticipated every single one of them. Everything that John Calvin came up with, the Bible anticipated it and refuted it long before he put it down on paper. Every false doctrine, every person has ever come up with, God anticipated it, the Bible refutes it, truth wins. Jesus died for all. How ridiculous is it to say, for God so loved the world? Oh, that's the elect world, right? I mean, every verse that you come to, you have to change it to fit some Calvinistic teaching. Away with that. Let us just hold on to what the Bible says, and that Jesus did taste of death for every man. Now it's every man's responsibility to do what he needs to do to come into contact with that saving blood and for that atonement. Number Yeah, Romans 1 and verse 4 or 5, I believe it's verse 4, I may be wrong, and declared to be the Son of God with power by the resurrection of the dead. It's the resurrection of the dead that declares Jesus' deity and declares that he is the Son of God. In chapter 3 and verse 1, we learned that as Christians, we are the most blessed people on earth. It's Romans 1:4. Okay, thank you. I need to keep making those mental notes. In chapter 3 and verse 1, wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Jesus Christ. You see that phrase that makes us the most blessed people on earth? Partakers. That's you and I. That's us. We are partakers of the heavenly calling. We are the most blessed people. In chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, we learned that Christ is superior to Moses. And number 7, in chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, we learned that to go to heaven, we must have an obedient faith. Disobedience is not rewarded. When your child or grandchild disobeys a direct order, do they get the cookie? Do they get the ice cream? No, you don't reward bad behavior. And most of the time. But God definitely, those grandbabies sometimes get away with a lot, don't they? But God does not reward bad behavior. We must have an obedient faith. Number 8, to go to heaven, we must give God our heart. He wants our heart. He wants us to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. He wants to be first, and He's not going to co-rule with us on the throne of our hearts. He wants it all. He wants to be number one. In chapter 4 and verse 11, to go to heaven, we must be committed. We need to be committed. That's clinging. If we're committed to the cross and to Christ, we're going to cling to it. We're going to hold on to it. We're going to latch hold of the coattails of the Son of God, Revelation 14:4, and we're not going to turn Him loose. We're going to hold on and follow Him to glory. That is commitment. That is saying that no matter what happens, I'm going to obey Jesus. In chapter 5 and verse 7, we see that Jesus prayed in Gethsemane, and we must pray too. There are times in our life where we find ourselves in our own Gethsemane, if you will, in our own hour of trial, and we need to pray. That's what Jesus did. And in chapter 5 and verse 7, we see that not only did He pray, but He offered up prayers with strong crying, vehement tears. And sometimes we've got to pour ourselves out to our God in like fashion. And number 11, signs that point to a lack of spiritual growth. In chapter 5, verses 10 through 12, God called an high priest after the order of Melchizedek, of whom we have many things to say and hard to be uttered, seeing ye are dull of hearing. And so there's a lack of growth there, and we need to be growing in the grace and knowledge. We need to be studying. We need to be praying. We need to be learning. And so that's something that we learn from the book of Hebrews. We learned that the greatness of God is unsearchable and His heart is incomparable. That's beautiful. That is an absolutely beautiful. We're almost out of time, so I got to keep moving. Verse 13, we should give God at least $1 out of every 10. And that's a great place to start. While tithing is not commanded, it's a great start. But when you think of the Jewish tithe, they had 3 of them. There were 3 tithes in Israel. And so Israel was really given 30%. That's something that maybe we should consider as well. We know that God loveth a cheerful giver, and so we'll leave it at that, right? God loveth a cheerful giver. We learn that none of us are perfect but Jesus, Hebrews 7:25 and following. And so He was holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, made higher than the heavens. He was perfect. And so we can hold on to His perfectness. When we're covered by His blood, God looks down and sees the blood of His Son. When God looks down at us and we're in Christ, God sees perfection, not because of us, but because of Jesus. And we can hold on to that. And we can have assurance in that. When he said, when I see the blood, I will pass over them, right? And so when God looked down at the children of Israel and He saw the blood of the Lamb on the doorpost and the lintel, the death angel passed. And in like manner, the blood of Christ is applied to us. And when He sees the blood, He's able to ferret us out and say, that's mine. And that's what he sees. He doesn't see my imperfections. He doesn't see the times in which I fall, because as I walk in the light, as he is in the light, I have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus Christ, his son, cleanses me continually of all sin. And so when I make a mistake and I'm living a penitent life, God doesn't see the sin. It's immediately covered. Isn't that beautiful? Doesn't that help us to live the Christian life? God has a forgetter, and it works really well. Hebrews chapter 8 and verse number 12. We have an appointment and a judge. Hebrews 9, 27 and 28. It is appointed unto men once to die, and after this cometh judgment. And to they that look for him shall he appear a second time without sin unto salvation. With Christ, we can think about hell without fear. It is Christ that gives us the ability to go on and live a faithful life, not a perfect life, but not to live in fear of death because of hell. We can live in view of death with the joy of knowing whenever my life ends, I'm heaven bound. That is a blessing. Number 18, faith takes what you cannot see and makes it real to you. That's what these heroes of faith, they did. They took what they couldn't see, and it made it real to them. Daniel, when he said, "Know this, O king, that the God that we serve, he can deliver us out of this fire, but even if he don't, we're not going to worship you." But it was real to Daniel. It was real to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It was real to them that God could deliver them, and they acted on faith, and God delivered them. When we look unto Jesus, there is no reason to look elsewhere. Those heroes of faith, I like what Eric used the term draw on. We draw on those cloud of witnesses. We see their faith, and it helps us. But we look unto Jesus ultimately, the author and the finisher of our faith, because he endured some things too. Who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. For consider him who endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your mind. Our ultimate focus is on Jesus. Number 20, we learned that love is good. We need to love the brethren. Let brotherly love continue. That's something that we need to do. If we'll let brotherly love continue, if we'll treat each other as we want to be treated, if we'll treat each other as Christ treats us, and we're forgiving and we're motivated by love, man, we're going to explode and grow, and just it's going to be a piece of heaven on earth here. Adultery is awful. We learned that in chapter 13 and verse 4. But ultimately, we learned that God is faithful. God will never fail us, forsake us, or leave us. And in light of that truth, let us never let go. Let us remain faithful. Let us never give up. Thank you so much. Hope you have enjoyed this Hebrews class.